So, boundaries, finding your true self. So, here's what we're going to explore in our time together. First of all, I'll just give you a little bit of background on who I am and why it is that I talk about boundaries. And then we'll talk about what boundaries are, boundary kryptonite, and then setting or developing boundaries, and then ways to support yourself in this boundary journey. So first of all, as Rose said, I'm a spiritual life coach. I'm an explorer of the inner realms, an artist and a mom. And I come to this topic of boundaries from a place of having zero boundaries. So I started at ground zero, and it's of course still a journey for me, but I've learned so much along the way that I'm excited to share. And from where I started, sorry, I'm just going to fix my screen here. There we go. From where I started, I was born into a family and experienced early child sexual trauma with my father. My mother was one who did not validate my feelings or see me, and I was the one who always had to take care of her feelings. So from a very early age, I was constantly just trying to live by taking care of everybody else. I didn't know that I had a self. I didn't know what boundaries were. I had no boundaries, which is why one of my strategies for surviving was to hide. Because as long as I could go under the radar, nobody could ask me to do anything, because if they asked me to do anything, I'd be terrified because I could never say no. And then I get myself into all kinds of trouble. So that is the background of boundaries and where I come from. Okay. So there's a common understanding of boundaries that I've found where people talk about, boundaries are to keep people out, that we need to set our boundaries. And I even heard some talk of that as we were introducing ourselves, in terms of, firming up my boundaries. I need to make them firm. So we have to create this protection around us to keep us safe, right? That's the common view of what boundaries are. And that's what I started with as well. That's what I thought boundaries were about. And of course, in this model for me, I failed miserably, because I would set my boundaries and then people would run right over them. And I'd be like, okay, what just happened here? I set my boundary, and it seemed like nothing happened. And I'd put a ton of energy into firming up and holding those boundaries and making sure that I was saying what I needed to say. Of course, that didn't always happen either. But anyway, it did not work for me, which is why I came up with a slightly different view of boundaries. Okay. So what I think your boundary is, what I've come to believe, is that your boundary is actually an energetic field that surrounds you. And your boundary is the field that is made up of all the unique things that define you. So everything from your preferences of ice cream and coffee versus tea and laying in the sunshine or dancing in the rain or whatever it is, that becomes your boundary. So it's like this energy bubble that makes up all of who you are. And I love Brene Brown's definition of a boundary. She says at its most basic level, it's what's okay and what's not okay with you. And the interesting thing that I've discovered about boundaries is that they operate on an unconscious and energetic level. So what does that mean? Well, that's exactly what I was talking about. When I would set my boundaries and people would just run over them, it's because it wasn't a true boundary. It's what I wanted to have happen. It's what I wanted to bring into existence, but it didn't really exist. It's not something that we can do with our minds. It's something that we do with our energy field. So the common understanding of boundaries is based on ego and force and will and our intellect. And I see boundaries as more being an embodiment of our true selves. That's what our boundary is. And the interesting thing about boundaries and the energetic component is that what I discovered also is that animals and children especially respond to energy, right? They don't have that intellectual capacity of reasoning that we adults do. And so that's the best place to know where your boundaries are at is with children and animals, because they just instinctively react to the energy of what's going on. Okay, so let's look at the difference between boundaries that are weak and boundaries that are strong and healthy. And how is this energy bubble of a boundary around us created? When we are born, we come in and we have experiences. And these experiences are very often experiences that as an infant, we can't handle. So we cry out for our mother because we're hungry, and our mother's in the shower and she doesn't hear us right away. And there's a part of us that goes, oh my God, what's happened? I've been abandoned. I'm here all alone. I'm not going to get fed. I'm going to die. And then, of course, mother comes and that's not the situation. But those experiences that we have, especially from 0 to 6, are what creates our core belief system about ourself and the world. And that's what creates our initial boundary around ourselves. So what we do as children is we create these adaptive patterns in order to survive. So that's where all of the codependency, the people pleasing comes from, is this deep inner fear that if somebody is angry with me, then I'm not going to survive, right? So it's core beliefs that go so deep that it goes to a deeply unconscious place. So we may not understand fully in the moment, like, I don't understand why this is such a big deal for me, whatever it is that's going on. But then as I sit with myself, I can then begin to understand where this leads. And this is the beauty of boundaries, is because this boundary journey is what gives us the blueprint and the roadmap to go and recover our true selves over time, which is super cool. So these adapted patterns I call create the adapted self. So that's the self that we walk around the world in as we grow up, and then we begin to have experiences with this adapted self and with boundaries, and we begin to get feedback from the world, which for me was very brutal, because I had zero boundaries. And so it led me into extreme amounts of chaos and drama and dangerous situations, quite frankly. So there's two things that happen. One is that we have these different parts of ourselves. So does that make sense? Can you identify with that there's part of you that wants to go and write this book, and there's another part of you going, oh, no, that's way too unsafe. We can't go do that. Or I want to, there's an expression that wants to happen, or you want to say something, and then there's another part of you going, oh no, we can't say that. So there's adaptive patterns that were created to keep us safe. And there's different parts of us within ourselves. So is that a thumbs up? Yes, makes sense. Okay, beautiful. Okay. So weak boundaries come from the adaptive patterns that reveal our core wounds. So this is when if we have different parts that were okay, so the adaptive patterns that reveal the core wounds. So let me give you an example. For me, when I was first starting to work, I thought I was zero boundaries and had to take care of the feelings of everybody. So I would put myself in dangerous situations and not speak up so as not to make angry or have someone else feel disappointed. So one way that this showed up was in taking taxis between meetings. And so in these taxis, I one day it came to me what was happening, because this taxi driver was driving really erratically, and I was sitting in the back, and I wanted to put my seatbelt on, and I didn't, because I was afraid that the taxi driver would think that I didn't trust him. This is this is a taxi driver. This is a complete stranger. Why on earth I thought he would give a care in the least about what I thought about him or his driving, right? Like, that's like, wow, okay. And that was one of my first sort of awarenesses or realizations that, something was not quite right within me, that I would be willing to do this sort of awareness of, okay, what is going on here? Another indication of a weak boundary is when we give unconscious permission to strangers. So another way that this showed up was at work. Again, work is a great place for this. Work, family, home, it's life. So I had this deep core belief based on my early experiences that I don't matter. So I'd be in a work meeting, and I would gather up my courage, and I would say something that I thought was really relevant and helpful. And then nothing would really happen. And then 5 minutes later, somebody else would say exactly what I said. And then everybody would respond and say, "Oh yeah, that's a really good idea. Like that's really good." And I would just be like completely mystified, like, okay, am I invisible? Like, did I speak that? Did nobody hear what I said? Like, I don't understand what's going on here. And what was actually going on is that because I had the core belief that I don't matter, my opinion doesn't matter, then I would energetically give unconscious permission for people not to listen to me. Yeah, that's how this works. All right, another thing about weak boundaries is that it creates chaos within. So this is where we have the different inner poles between these different parts of ourselves, parts of us that are wounded, parts of us that are not so wounded, parts of us that want different things, right? Have you noticed that when you want something, you want to do something, and then there's all this negotiation inside ourselves about, how are we going to do this? So this chaos and drama. So if you're noticing that there's a lot of that going on in your life as you're moving through life, then chances are it's related to having weak boundaries. And it's really good information for moving forward on this journey. And another piece of evidence for self-abandonment, or for weak boundaries, is self-abandonment. So that's when we completely move to or adopt another's opinion, view, action, and don't speak up for ourselves, don't do anything. Like, we just completely abandon ourselves and move into whatever the other person wants. Okay. All right. Yay. Okay. I got really good notes here, because I got to keep myself on track, or I'll go off into the weeds. All right. So some indications of strong and healthy boundaries is when we have alignment and clarity within. So I'm sure you've had the experience of knowing something, And it's something so deep. Like there is no chaos within, there's no drama within. It is just a truth that is within you. And there's just clarity and alignment. And then like just even saying that, I can feel my body respond with this, yes, like that's what it feels like with this type of strong and healthy boundary. What strong and healthy boundaries do is they create an invisible force field. So I was coaching somebody recently, and she was telling me about an interaction that she had where somebody was extremely disrespectful to her, and how this happens very often. It can be a stranger, or it could be someone in relationship with her. And she said, she said to me, well, what do you do when that happens to you? And I said, you know what, that doesn't actually happen to me. I can't relate to that experience of having a stranger be so rude to me. And so as we develop our boundaries and get strong and healthy boundaries, those kinds of things just kind of drop away. So any kind of disrespectful behavior or things that are not okay, let's just put it that way, in our interactions with each other, then this invisible force field, it's almost like it's not something that I have to putting any energy into, because as we heal our wounds within, as we release those adaptive patterns, we just bring ourselves into this state of alignment. We create this invisible force field, and that's just how it works, which is really good news, because it's a really beautiful place to work towards. With strong and healthy boundaries, we are emotionally neutral and not rigid. So when something happens and it's coming up with, we have to give an answer of yes or no, and we know exactly what it is because we've got the alignment and clarity within, we can just say it. And when we say yes or we say no, we don't have this leftover, what's going to happen? This feeling inside of, oh no, like this is like an anxiety and nervousness about, how are they going to take my no? Is it going to be okay? Is it all right? Uh, you know, versus when it's a strong and healthy boundary, we're just emotionally neutral and go, nope, that doesn't work for me. But thanks so much for the offer. Right. And it's also this force field, this boundary, this energetic boundary is not rigid. It can move and change over time. And it does move and change over time as we grow within ourselves, as we grow in our life and learn things and have new experiences. We will find that this is the case. And it's not that, like with this emotionally neutral, it's not that we don't take others' emotions into account. It's just that we don't automatically self-abandon ourselves. So, we can appreciate, my friend asks me to help her move, and it really doesn't work for me, and I can say no, and I can appreciate that that's going to be difficult for her and she's going to have to find another way, or perhaps I can help her find another way to find some help for her to move. But it doesn't affect my inner peace. Let's put it that way. All right. And with strong, healthy boundaries, I'm reminded there's a famous quote by Eleanor Roosevelt that said, "No one can make you feel bad without your permission." And I would venture to say that nobody can cross your boundaries without your permission. So even if it's unconscious permission, that's what the reality is with this energetic boundary, which to me is the real boundary, not the false one of the intellect and the ego. So as we heal, we create these stronger boundaries. Okay, boundary kryptonite. So kryptonite, I assume everybody remembers Superman and kryptonite. Superman could fly through the air. He was stronger than any person could possibly be. He could do anything unless there was kryptonite. And in the presence of kryptonite, he would crumble. He would fall to the ground. He had no strength. He had no energy. He couldn't do anything. He was completely incapacitated. So boundary kryptonite is what I call those people, situations, or perhaps a feeling that happens where it is almost instantaneous that we abandon ourselves and that we give in, right? And so I invite you to think about what your boundary kryptonite might be. I know that for myself, my boundary kryptonite is, and I'm still working on this. This is boundary kryptonite is like the most difficult. It's gotten better over time, but it's still something that I'm working with. And that is when I think somebody's going to be disappointed. So I'll give you an example. My father-in-law called me up and my stepfather called me up and said, my stepbrother was coming to town and could he borrow my car? I had just bought a brand new car. We were not going to be there for the time that he was wanting to borrow it. So it wasn't an issue. But when he asked me the question, could he borrow it? My instant knowingness, my instant truth was no. But I didn't have a good reason to say no. And I didn't want to disappoint my stepfather, and I didn't want to disappoint my stepbrother. And I thought everybody would think, what a mean person she is, right? How could she say no to that? So what I did was I said in the moment, I said, you know what, let me sit with that and I'll get back to you. And so I sat with it, which meant I was going over and over and over in my mind about, what he could possibly say and how disappointed he would be and what would happen if he's disappointed, and, all this crazy energy putting into this when all he's done is just ask to borrow my car. So I gathered up my strength. I connected with myself. I knew what my answer was. And I just had to be willing to be uncomfortable, to say what my answer is, and then stand in that truth. So I phoned up my stepfather and said, you know what? I really don't want him it doesn't work for me to have him borrow my car. And I just left it at that. I didn't give any reasons. I didn't give anything more than that. Just, it doesn't work for me. And my stepdad said, okay, no problem. We'll find somewhere else. To which I thought, oh my God, what if I just said that? Saved myself all of that angst that I had, and the back and forth and within, and what was going to happen. And so with boundary kryptonite, if you know what your kryptonite is, then you can create a plan for when those situations or people or feelings happen, that you can then support yourself in standing in your own truth, and then having that natural boundary be strong. Okay. So how about some examples of what weak boundaries looks like? Okay. So weak boundaries. So you can sort of see what lands for you, what you can identify with for yourself. So here's some examples. Number one, to say no when you mean yes. To say yes when you mean no. A weak boundary is when you feel guilty or bad in saying no. It's when you have an inability to ask for what you want or need, i.e., if you have a belief that you don't deserve it. A weak boundary is pleasing others at the expense of myself, my values, or my integrity. That looked like that was something that you could relate to, Rachel and Pam. Okay, another example of a weak boundary is censoring myself or remaining silent when I have something to say. Adopting someone else's opinion, belief. In other words, bowing to social pressure because everybody else thinks this. So I am not comfortable in speaking my own truth. A weak boundary is indicated by not addressing someone who has mistreated me, by accepting physical touch or sex when we don't want it, by allowing ourselves to be distracted or interrupted for someone else's agenda. Bob Marie, I think you had mentioned something about that. Yes. When we act out of integrity, right? What causes us to act out of integrity is a weak boundary. When we're giving too much so that we can be perceived as good or useful. Yeah, I got that one. that one's big for me. And that one comes with a feeling of resentment. So if that's a common thing for you, resentment, you might want to take a look at if you are giving too much because you want to be perceived as good or useful. Becoming overly involved in other people's problems or lives. This is one that we moms tend to have a little bit of struggle with. In not defining or communicating my emotional needs in relationship. Guilty. And a weak boundary is also indicated by feeling anxiety in a relationship. So those are just some. It's a pretty comprehensive list, but it's an indication of how you know where there's work to do. And the great part is that all of this can change, right? This is just the place that we're starting from now. And okay, so I found this little video on the internet and I want to show it to you. It's a 1-minute video and I thought it was a beautiful example of boundaries. So I'm going to show it to you first and then I'm going to ask you, so I'll show it to you again and then we'll ask some questions.
Buster, I'm really going to, Buster, come here, you little shit. Be a good boy for once in your life. Are you done? Come here. Buster Henry, Buster. All right. Come here. Hey, that's what's my towel. Don't you dare, Buster. Come here. Hey, leave that vacuum cleaner alone. Hey, are you ready to come in?
Come on. Let's go, come on. Down the pool. Let's go, come on. Go over here, let mommy dry you. Go dry him. Come over here. No, sir. Touch her. Get over here now.
Okay, so as this relates to boundaries, I ask you, are the dogs honoring her boundary? Did you notice what her strategies were? She was being sweet, she was begging, she was shaming, she was being angry. Were any of those things working? No. Did you feel the unconscious permission she was giving to the dog? Did it seem like she really meant what she was saying? No. And what was different about the man's boundary when he spoke his boundary? Did he mean it? Yeah. Could you feel that he meant it? Yeah. And the dogs could feel it too, right? So here it is again. I'm going to play it one more time with, so I invite you to notice these different aspects.
Buster, I'm really gonna, Buster, come here, come here, come here, you will shit. Be a good boy for once in your life. Are you done? Come here, come here. Buster, Buster Henry, Buster. Don't you dare, Buster. Here. Here. You're alone? Hey, are you ready to come in?
Come on. Let's go. Come on. Down the pool. Let's go. Go on. Go on. Go on. Go over. Mommy drive. Good drive. Come over. No, sir. Buster. Get over here now.
And did you notice that the dog tried to go back in the water at the end? Like he was gonna just go and do his thing that he wanted to do. And then it was like, no, you come here, right? Again, I could feel it in my body. I could feel that energy of truth, of firmness, of this is the way it is. This is the invisible force field that I'm talking about, right? That when we speak, the power of our words have more gravity, right? When we have strong boundaries. Okay. This is so fun. I love this. Okay, so do we set boundaries or do we discover and develop boundaries? Well, I'm guessing if you're with me so far, you'll realize that setting boundaries is to me a bit of a pointless exercise. It's a good exercise for me to know what boundaries I want to have. But this idea that I can set my boundaries and then I'm going to make them be firm and people are going to listen to me just led to complete and utter disappointment for me because it didn't happen. It didn't work. The more she tried, I mean, I think, you know, if you could be in the mind of the dog, the more she shamed and tried. And, you know, I think the dog was actually just, you know, he didn't, it's not that he was intentionally disobeying. It was just like, he did not hear her words. He did not hear the boundary. What he heard was, go for it, go and jump in the pool again, right? So instead of setting our boundaries, then what the heck do we do? Well, we discover and develop them. So I say discover because it's always a process of new situations and experiences arising in our lives. Back a couple of years ago, you might remember that the government decided to tell us who we could have at Christmas dinner. And I discovered that I have a boundary about that and that was not okay with me. And my husband said, well, I didn't know you had, such a problem with authority. Like, where'd this come from? Like, what kind of rebel? And I said, well, I didn't know that either until they brushed up against this boundary. And then I discovered that I do actually have a boundary around that, and that is not okay with me. So the other great thing about developing boundaries is that it takes no extra energy. So all that energy that we were putting into, firming up and speaking and making sure, and I mean, how much energy did she put into trying to get the dog not to jump in the pool? That was a lot of energy, a lot of emotional energy, a lot of time. And how about when the man did it? Like almost zero, right? It was just like, boom. So when we develop our boundaries, what we're really doing is that we're healing our adaptive patterns and we're healing those core wounds within us. And I love this beautiful quote from Teal Swan. And she's the one that sort of like clicked my mind into seeing boundaries in a whole different way. She said, developing boundaries is a crucial part of finding our true selves. Because that's what this is. This is letting go of the adapted ways that we've lived, the adapted self, and coming into living our true self in the world. Okay, so how can we do this? What is our strategies to support ourselves in this boundary journey? Well, I came up with a whole bunch, so you're in luck. Number one is to remember that it's a healing journey. It's not an intellectual exercise, that it happens over time, that we're going to move forward and we're going to, be pushed back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's a bit of a dance. Overall, we'll be moving forward, but it's really important to remember it's a journey. So, I had this big healing. I'm like, yes, I can say no now to this. And, all of a sudden I'm like, the moment comes and I'm like, and then I crumble and say yes. And then I'm mad and frustrated and don't want to do what I've said I would do. And of course, that does not create good relationships. It does not create happy homes. So remember that it's a healing journey. Number 2, closely related to that, is to have self-compassion and grace for ourselves. So when that happens, when we don't do it perfectly, when we fall into the hole, that we give ourselves self-compassion. And that means being kind to ourselves. There's a lot of shame, I find, related to boundaries, where we think that we should just have boundaries. And then when we fall down, when we don't, when we have something that's like a weak boundary show up, there's a lot of shame in that. And so we can sometimes be mean to ourselves about that, which of course is like the most unhelpful thing we can do. So having self-compassion, doing something kind for ourselves, whatever that is, to bring us back into a right relationship with ourselves. So we can phone a friend and say, oh my God, you won't believe what I just did. And they can, of course, give you the compassion that sometimes we don't give to ourselves, because our friends can do that for us. And imagine that you are treating yourself like you would treat a 5-year-old who just fell down and scraped their knee. Because that's what it's like when we abandon ourselves, when we don't have a boundary and an experience happens to us and it's not what we wanted to have happen, right? So just imagine that 5-year-old with a scraped knee. How would you comfort them. And that's how you can then comfort and be compassionate to yourself. Number 3, give yourself space. This one has been absolutely critical for me. And it comes in 2 different ways. So I gave the example of the car. So sometimes if you're in the moment, you don't have to give an answer immediately. And if someone needs you to give an answer immediately, then you can just, you can just take the time that you need. That's what they need. But if you need space to sort it out with yourself, then take that space. I knew in that moment I wanted to say no, but I wasn't emotionally ready to handle the blowback if blowback would come, right? If they said, oh, well, but you're not using your car anyway, you're not even in town, why can't we do it? I didn't have an answer for that because it wasn't about that. It was about the answer within me was no. By the way, he's a terrible driver too, so that's the other part, but anyway, we won't go there. The other part of giving yourself space, I started taking solitary retreats, and I can't recommend it enough to just gift yourself with a certain period of time, even if it's only a couple of days. For me, I was doing it for 3 days, not every month, but for about 10 times in a row, roughly. And what was incredible about that space and that time was I discovered what it is I do want, because I was so enmeshed and so aware of everybody else's feelings and what their desires were. It was hard for me to know what my own was in amongst all that other energy. So by taking myself and giving myself space, it was like this adventure of discovering myself. Like, wow, what do I want? What do I like? How do I want to manage my day and my time? And to just allow myself to flow from activity to activity was just absolutely, completely such a gift, the biggest gift I've ever given myself, quite frankly. So I highly recommend that. Number 4 is engage your divine masculine. So we all have the energies of the feminine and the masculine within us. Women have the technology body of this feminine body, and men, so we embody that divine feminine, but we still have the energy of the masculine within us as well. So what I envision, how I visualize it and feel it, is to imagine that my own divine masculine is in the back of my body. So the back of my head and shoulders and hips and legs, and that I can just rest into being held by that divine masculine. So that to me is, again, if I've fallen down and I'm having a rough time, or there's a real big challenge for me, just taking a few moments to breathe and to rest into my own divine masculine can bring so much healing and so much comfort. All right, number 5 is self-awareness. Self-awareness is key. I remember when I first had my my first therapist, and she would ask me about my feelings, and I would look at her like she had 2 heads. I had no idea what she was talking about. Like, what is a feeling? I didn't even know. I was so disconnected from my body. All I knew was, from here up, and my body was just to take me from one place to another. And so as I started to become more aware of my body and my feelings, like this whole inner world opened up to me. So being self-aware, noticing when we're making stories or playing out scenarios in our head, that's a really good key for me. If I start going back and forth in my mind about something, about a conversation that needs to happen, then I know that I'm up against some kind of boundary issue for myself. Notice the patterns that show up in your life. So if you constantly running into the same type of people, so extremely empathic people seem to attract narcissists and perpetrators. And so, that's a really good indication if it's, the same type of people showing up, the same type of scenarios showing up, different cast of characters, but the same basic drama playing out, the same pattern. That's a really big indication that there's an adaptive pattern and core wound that needs some healing. And I invite you with the self-awareness as much as possible to adopt the witnessing part of you. We all have this part within us that's the witnessing part. And it's the part that sees the other parts, that knows the other parts, and it's sort of like that neutral place within us. So if you're not familiar with that place, I invite you just to go on just allow that to be a possibility for you, and to see if you can find that witnessing place where you can notice the part of you that's having a tantrum, the part of you that's angry, the part of you that wants to do this thing, that wants to enroll and create art, whatever it is. Oh, and the Inside Out movie. If you haven't seen the Inside Out movie, it's fantastic. And the #2 movie that just came out is even more fantastic. So I highly recommend those two movies, the original Inside Out and the Inside Out 2. Very well done, very inspiring, and you'll get a lot of insights into this whole inner landscape that they show in the movie. All right, that's self-awareness. #6, develop a kryptonite plan. Okay, I talked about that a little bit before, and that is when you know what your kryptonite is, then you can develop your kryptonite plan. And then when that gets triggered within you, there's a kryptonite issue that comes up, then you've got a plan in place where you can, I highly recommend, again, giving space to yourself, and then just sitting with yourself, using all the tools, all of what I've talked about already, to sort of fortify yourself to deal with that situation. #7, practice being uncomfortable. Who likes to be uncomfortable? Nobody. As we are moving, if there's a no, and you've never said no before to this person or situation, I guarantee you 100%, the first time you go to say no, it's going to be very uncomfortable because it hasn't happened before. So if you can know that ahead of time, that's going to be the experience, and let that be okay. Again, that employ that self-compassion and that kindness to yourself, right? And know that your first no, your first yes is going to be shaky. And that's okay, right? That's okay. And it does get easier over time. All right, practicing being uncomfortable. #8, wear the villain crown. I got this idea from Dr. Kelly Brogan. She talks about wearing the villain crown, and I really like it. It's about standing in your truth and letting others have their reaction. So others may criticize you and say you're being mean and whatever, and you're selfish, and how could you do that to me? And if you are just wearing the villain crown and just wear it like, okay, you know what? That's how you see it. I see it differently. I'm sorry that's the case, but that's the villain crown. So I love that. I love that term. I think I got to actually make myself a villain crown for just those moments. #9, sacrifice versus compromise. So with self-awareness, and I said that, you know, the great thing about having strong boundaries is we're not rigid. We can move. We can take into account the feelings of others or particular situations. And if we make a conscious choice to do something other than what we really wanted to do, then that is compromise. Sacrifice is when we don't make that conscious choice and we just abandon ourselves and do what it is that we don't want to do. Again, very often we feel resentful, angry, frustrated. So if those are some of the feelings that you're getting, just notice, am I in this place of sacrifice or compromise? And compromise is emotionally neutral because I've chosen it. I did want to go do this thing for me, and you know, my son needs me at his event. So I'm going to choose that in this instance. And it's a one-off thing, right? So if we're constantly compromising, then that's a bit of a rationalization, which is telling ourselves a rational lie, right? We think we're making a conscious choice, but the real telltale sign is, do I feel resentful, angry, frustrated, right? All right, and finally, to occupy your space and radiate your light. So remembering, I believe that we are all here on a divine mission to grow ourselves, to heal this planet, to ascend to the next level of humanity, to ascend to the next level for the planet. And developing boundaries decreases the amount of chaos and drama and problems in our lives, which gives us more energy to put towards that divine mission. So if we're not busy being frustrated and resentful and doing things that we don't want to do, then we have all that energy then to put towards being the light that we are, bringing our light, and so that we can fully share ourselves and our gifts in the world. Because that's, I think, what we're here for. So I hope that gives you a whole bunch of ways to, and strategies to think about ways that you can develop your boundaries. So if you want to work with me, as Rose said at the beginning, I do have the one-on-one coaching, the women's circles, and my big passion at the moment is developing the sanctuary of the feminine. And that's where a lot of my energy is going into at the moment. Thank you so much for being part of this.